Hello. Hopefully this thing will keep up and won't go to the black screen again. But my name is Austin Burns. I guess I could just go forward. I'm going to be doing a talk, basically how you could build an MVC API in Express, so Node as well. I guess you have to. I'm just going to do it like this. Can everyone see that, or should I blow it up? It's just easier for me to do it this way. All right. So a little about me. I started programming right after college. Basically took an elective intro to PHP and loved it. So wanted to continue on. I eventually moved up to New York City for 4 years to basically just progress myself as a software engineer. Learned a lot while I was up there. Went to meetups and all of that up there as well. And then finally moved back, and now I'm a software engineering manager at a company called DigArc here in downtown Orlando. So I'll get right into it. If any of you don't know what MVC stands for, it stands for Model View Controller. It's kind of like it's a pattern, but it can be, depending on what you're building the MVC architecture in, it could be a little bit different in ways. But as far as building like an API, so I'll start with model. So a model in an API usually represents your data objects, and sorry, haven't talked in a long time, so bear with me. It is what allows you to interact with your data store. So you can have like your database, and you'll have your view, which I'll explain in a second, and there's an abstraction, and you don't have to worry about your actual data being touched from your view. And then you can, a lot of times people use an ORM, which is an object relational, it stands for object relational mapping. And it's basically just a piece of software that kind of allows you to not have to write, say, SQL queries or MongoDB queries or things of that nature. It's a piece of software that makes it easier for you for like simple CRUD actions and things of that nature. Or, as I said, you could build your models manually if you would like to. And then the view, as I mentioned earlier, a view is how your user interacts with your application. So basically, if they click a button or something like that, that's all going to be in the view. And again, yeah, like I said, how the user is able to see the data. So when you pull data from your data store, from your model, it will then get displayed somehow on your view, and that's how the user will see it. And it can be HTML templates if you're using it in more of a front-end application, or if you're using it in a back-end API, it could just be a JSON object or an XML object or what have you. It all depends on the type of application. And then the last part of MVC is the controller. And controllers are kind of like the liaison, the middleman between the view and the model. So whenever you do an action, or the user does an action on the view, it will send a command or something to the controller, and the controller will then send off a command to the data store to either update something, get something, do something of that nature, and then the data store will send it back, or the model, sorry, will send it back to the controller, and then the controller will do something with it and send it back to the view. So again, as I said, it's kind of like the middleman. And it allows an easy separation, a separation of concerns between your model and your view. And I know I kind of went through that quickly, but I'm going to go through code and kind of explain it a little bit more. So if you did want to learn more about MVC architecture and how those three pieces work together, I added some links. Some of the stuff I've gotten from some of these links, and some I read the links and thought they would be useful. So really quick, some of the things that we're going to look at in the code here in a few minutes is, again, this is all, like, I guess my preference, if you will, but I am a huge proponent of organization in code. So I did a lot of things to kind of take the MVC architecture in Express and just make it much more understandable as far as the directory structure and the code and things of that nature. So that's one of the things I will show you is how you can easily organize your directory structure and files to be more MVC in Express. How you can easily auto-generate CRUD routes and other routes, because I'm not sure if you guys have ever worked in Express before, but when you're building out your routes, it can be very manual. You can build out a lot. I mean, the file can get pretty long. So I designed a way to be able to kind of automate all of that and have it build out the routes for you without you having to actually build all of that code. I'm then going to show you how I implemented JWT authentication so that you can guard certain routes with authorization and also not guard certain routes. And then the last thing I will show is, well, I kind of just said it, but I will show you how you'll be able to build route guards that utilize the JWT authentication and allow you to guard certain routes and even certain methods, but not certain methods on those routes. So that being said, let's look at some code. All right, can't really see this very well, but so I will start, since I started with a model, just to re-explain kind of more in-depth in the code what MVC is. Here's a simple model, a sample model. It's the user model, and mind you, I'm using Mongoose, which is a JavaScript ORM, just to make it easier to interact with Mongo. But as you can see, so I'm defining the user schema here through Mongoose, and it's fairly simple. You have your email, which is required, has to be unique, is of type string. Then there's a password, and then it records the timestamps as well. I will get into this a little bit later when we get into JWT authentication. But that's pretty much, that is one part of a model. It allows you to define your schema. And then the second part is, as I said before, this will create a data object within your application that will then allow you to easily modify your data. So create a new user, update a user, read or get a user, and then also delete a user if you would like. So your simple CRUD operations, and then as well as some other things that come with the ORM if you were to use this. So then a simple view, which technically I don't exactly have a view, it's just a simple JSON object. So if you were to have, again, as I said before, if you were to have an application, you might actually have views that are actual templates that read in some data that you get from the controller, and then you can say, like, either if you're using handlebars or any other templating language, you then can easily build out your view and pass in the data through the view. However, since I am just building an API, there really is no view. It's just a JSON object. That being said, I will show you. So I went, because I don't like code repetition, I'm a huge proponent of dry, don't repeat yourself. I decided I was going to build a base CRUD controller, and then all of my controllers were then just going to extend that. That way I did not have to build basically your simple CRUD operations for every single controller. So you can see right here, I just have a class controller. pull in the model, and also I'll show you how that gets instantiated and all that. And then a simple create, get, or read, get all, or list, however you want to call it. I like calling it list for whatever reason. And you'll also notice that we are using the model here. So this is what I was talking about, where the ORM basically allows you to easily run your CRUD operations on your data store, but it comes from the model. So this is all coming from Mongoose. When I build out that schema, I get all of these simple CRUD operations as well to modify the model. So you'll see find by ID, create, find for a listing, find by ID and update to update the model, and find by ID and remove to remove the model. Now, as I said before, this is just a base controller that I built so that I can pretty much use that for just about every resource if it's just simple CRUD. Now, if I want to do something beyond that, for instance, for the auth controller, you're going to want like login and again that JWT authentication. All I have to do is build out the auth controller and extend the controller, and then by simple OOP, I then get all of those CRUD operations for the model, which I believe I'm using the user model on here, for the user model, as well as some extras that I tack on. So being able to find the user and authenticate the user, and then also log in. So that's a simple controller. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So that's not necessarily standard. I like whenever there's something that's supposed to be quote unquote private. I know you have your private keywords and things of that nature that are coming out, but for me, I usually just make any or have anything that is private just with an underscore. It's some people do it, some people don't. I just got used to it, so that's why I have the underscores there, because they're not being referenced outside of this class.
That's like for the developers saying, please don't touch this, this is internal stuff.
Yeah, for the pretty much. I mean, you can touch it if you want, but it's just for a developer to know that this is not, you're not going to be able to use this outside of the class itself. So for instance, you can see right here, I don't have a underscore in login, and that's because login you are able to use outside of the class. So I will go to the routes now. And if I'm talking too fast, I know, again, like I said, I've done this in a while, so I might be talking a little quick. If you guys have any questions, or if you want me to kind of like go back and show you something, that I kind of glanced over or whatever, if you have any questions at all, please just kind of raise your hand, stop me. I have no problem answering questions with any of this. So let's see here. So this is how I built the routes with an Express. Again, as I said, I started building out the routes where it's just you have your, you get your router. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Sorry, guys. You get your router, and then you can build basically your post, get, update, delete, all of your different HTTP methods on that route. And you can do that for each single route, but again, you're going to get a big file. It's going to be huge. That's unnecessary, and it's hard to maintain. Because of that, and because I'm a huge proponent of dry, I decided to build a util method called build routes, which I'll show you in a second, that allows me to basically build all of those routes automatically, dynamically, and also add some extra features in. So you'll see right here, first I'll start with the index file. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me go back. Let me go to the actual server. So this is the server file that is going to build the Express. Sorry, the the actual application, the Express application. So this is what's going to run. You can see right here, app.listen, the port that I have in a config file, which I can show. And then once it's running, you just, in fact, I can even show you. I will spin this down. Can you also, okay, you can. So you'll see I'm starting to spin up the server. I'm using NodeMon, by the way, which is a basically NodeMon, well, I believe it stands for Node Monitor, and it allows you to monitor your files. So when you make an update, it will automatically restart the server. But you can see here, right at the very end, API running at localhost, blah, blah, blah. And if I go back to the code, you will see there's that console log that basically console logs out API running at localhost, the port that I have in my config file, and the API version that I also have in my config file. And I will go ahead and I will show you my config in a little while. So again, I'm going to say this probably 1,000 times, a huge proponent of dry. I don't like unnecessary code, and I also like organization. So because of that, in my server file, I thought it was unnecessary if I have index files that are dealing with the controllers and index files that are dealing with the routes. I thought it was unnecessary to have to add all of that to the server on a server file. Why not do it where it is, so in the routes or in the controllers, and then just basically export a method that allows you to easily bootstrap your app onto those. And as you can see, that's exactly what I do here. So I have a method that I created called setup middleware, and also a method I created called setup routes that I just pass in my app that I've spun up. And I will show you again. Right here, setup routes. I pass in the server. I then grab every entry in my routes object, and I just say server.use the route, so API, the API version, and then I use the key is the route, and then the value is the actual router for each route. So I pass the route here, and then the router there. So I just say server.use within the routes directory, so that anything that's dealing with routes is right there in its directory. You don't have to go and search in the server file to see what's happening and how you're setting up your routes. And then as you guys saw earlier, I also did that for my middleware as well. It's not nearly as intricate, but basically I pull in just a few libraries, and then pass in the server, and same deal. I just run over the middleware and just set up the middleware, but it's all located in the middleware directory. So anything that is dealing with itself is inside of that directory and not on the server file. And for me, it just makes it cleaner, but obviously that's purely preference. So I will go back to my routes. And now I'll explain kind of what's happening here. As I said before, so this is my routes object. Any route that I have, I'm going to add to this routes object. And as I said before, the key is going to be what the route is. And then the value is going to be the router that gets created by this build routes util method that I've created. And you can see here, I pass in the controller, which, if you'll remember, I have this base controller, that in the constructor I said this.model equals model. Well, here is the model that I'm passing in. So I'm pulling all of my models from the models directory and passing them in each into the base controller. And then for any route that I want all of the routes on that route, all of the routes on that router to have a route guard. So all CRUD operations to be guarded by the authentication, I just simply say guard, route guard. And again, I'll show you the route guard in a few minutes. However, if I only want certain parts, certain HTTP methods to be guarded behind a route, you'll see down here in the users, for instance, how are you able to build or make a new user if you have to be authenticated to make a user? That just doesn't simply work. It's not going to happen. So I want to be able to have authentication, so you have to be authenticated to modify a user, get users, delete users, but not be able to create a user. So I created this kind of like simple way where I pass in the HTTP methods that I want to be guarded behind the route guard, and then the route guard as well. And you could add, you could remove this method, any methods, you could add as many as you want. I mean, you could add all of them, but at that point you might as well just have the whole entire thing guarded behind a route guard. Is there any questions so far as to what I'm showing you? I don't want to leave anybody behind. Yeah?
So lines 25 through 28, just walking through that a little bit.
Yes.
Object.entries returns an array, correct?
Yeah, so object.entries returns an array with your key, the object key as the first, I guess, element in the array, and then the object value as a second element in the array. And you'll notice right here, so I'm taking the object.entries, which is going to be, again, the key and then the value. I'm mapping over them, and I'm destructuring the array key 0, key 1, and pulling out the route and the router by way of destructuring, and then using that in the map callback function. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you're like aliasing route to index 0, router to index 1.
Mm-hmm.
So you can pass that in and say, like, for instance, quizzes would be behind API/v1/quizzes.
Yes.
And then get post or whatever comes
from the router, which
build routes.
exactly from the build routes util. Yep. Which I will show here in just a second. Anybody else have any questions so far? Okay. So I will get into the meat of this. So this is the build routes method, or well, util method, util function, however you want to call it. And you'll notice at the top, I pass in the controller, the guard, and then any extra routes. And that's something that also I added in because I thought about it and I was like, well, what if you want to have your typical CRUD routes, but you want something extra? You want another route that doesn't deal with anything dealing with CRUD. I allow that to happen by optionally passing in an extra routes. And I can actually have it open. I might even be able to show you. So this is a different project I've been working on just slowly by myself. API routes. So you see right here, I pass in extra routes for a location search because I want to be able to search for a location for just this project. And you'll notice that I actually build out that route. It's very simple. It's just a very simple router, but it allows me to build any extra route that I want and then tack it on to that main routes. Because the way that Express works, and man, that sun's really killing me now, is when you build a router, any route, so if you have a route at the root directory, it's going to be at the root directory after any route that you've already created. So for instance, if you're creating a locations route and you have, I'll have to show you, okay, so let's go back to the build routes and I'll show you what I mean. So if you have a route, so say we have a location route, right? And I'm building this router, I would say, okay, I'm going to use route, which would be /location at this point, but I'm going to add on this router to that route, which then basically allows me to not have to worry about what is happening before this, this /, and it just tacks it on after that. So technically here, because of how everything is built, this is technically this right here. But I'm not having to worry about that, and all I have to worry about is what's going on after the /, because I'm tacking it on through this extra routes mechanism that I've created. So I'll go back to, and you'll see right here, I kind of explain this, but I'm doing sort of the same thing. I'm looping through the extra routes, if there are any, pulling out the route and any extra routers that were created, and then just tacking them on at the end of the route that I'm creating. So it allows me to tack on any extra routers that I want to build outside of the common CRUD operations. So going back to the top, I know I'm bouncing around. If anyone has questions, please just stop me. But going back to the top, we have the controller, the guard, and any extra routes that you want to tack on. So then, the way that you are able to guard routes in Express is it's basically just a simple piece of middleware. And middleware in Express is just any kind of function that takes in a request, a response, and then has a next method, if you will, that just basically passes on to the next middleware. That being said, I knew that I wanted to create, possibly create a guard, which basically puts in authentication. But then, as I said before, there are certain HTTP methods that I don't want to guard. Well, how would you go about doing that if you have to pass in some type of method? This was my way of doing that. I built out this other util method called build guards for request methods. Very well thought out, I like to say. But then I pass in the guard. I set up what I call a pass-through. And for anyone who's not familiar with what this does, this is what's called the REST operator. And it just takes in any arguments and puts them into an array. So I do that because I know that the function, the middleware function that's going to be coming through is going to have 3 arguments: a request, a response, and a next method. Well, if it's just a pass-through, that means I don't want to do anything to it. I just want to let it go through. So I'm pulling in all of those arguments, and then I'm just immediately invoking args array position 2, which is going to be the next method. So I'm basically just saying, if you're going to hit the pass-through, you're just, boom, right on to the next middleware. We don't care about you. So I build a object with all the method guards. So you see list, post, get, put, delete. And I start all of them with just a simple pass-through, meaning none of them are authenticated at this point. Now, if there is a guard, so if there is no guard, there's nothing to do anyway. We just want to just go ahead and pass it through. So if we don't even pass a guard in, oh man, there's nothing to do anyways. But if there is, we want to basically, we only want to put the guard on, again, the HTTP methods that we're trying to guard. So right here, again, if I pass in guard, it's just simple guard. We don't care about anything. But if this guard, which is going to be right here, has a methods key value, so if it has a methods key, oh man, and the methods value is an array, that means that we do have certain HTTP methods that we want to guard, but not all of them. So this is where and this was something I had to do just so I could make it a little bit cleaner, but I do what's called a guard setup, and I check all of the methods that are passed in, or I'm sorry, I check to see if there are methods passed in. If so, I tack the methods onto a new object called methods. Again, this was just so I could have it clean, a clean function down here, but you don't really need to worry about this too much. But long story short, I then pass the guard that's put onto, or pass the route guard that's put onto the guard. I know the naming conventions isn't the best, but you'll see here at the very end, I basically say, okay, so for any methods that are part of the methods I passed in, add the guard. And then I return method guards back, and you'll see at this point, method guards is just a simple object. And it either has a pass-through for that method, or it now has a guard on that method. And then for each route, I say, okay, so for the list routes, or for the routes that are just going to be, say, /location, so your get method and your post method for /location, I just add on the method guard. And again, it can either have a guard or have that simple pass-through, but I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to say, if it does have this, do this. If it doesn't have it, do this. I just simply put it on there, and it's either going to pass on straight through, or it's actually going to guard that route. And then, again, there's the extra routes. This is kind of interesting. I did not know this until I actually built this out. But in Express, if you have a route, I forget exactly what it's called, but basically a special key route, like for instance the ID colon ID here, that will take on anything, no matter what it is. Even if you specify a more specific route, if you have it below the /:ID, the /:ID will be the one that's picked. I'm not familiar with that because I work in Angular mainly, and Angular actually, if there's a more specific route, it'll pick that one first than the more basic route. However, Express does not do that. And that's kind of what this whole huge comment is. Basically saying the reason why I have my extra routes up above is because if you pass anything, no matter what it is, behind that /, this route is what is grabbed through Express. But anyways, so going on that note, I then have, if you're getting a single item, or you're updating an item, or you're deleting an item, you're usually going to pass an ID. So that's where I set up those routes. And again, I have the method guards, get, put, and delete, and then the controller for each one of those as well. And that's basically the meat of the build routes. And again, like I said, the reason why I like this is because I'm building this one time. I'm building out these routes through this router one time. Literally, that's the only place there is. Unless there's the extra routes, but that's completely outside of this. So the benefit of that is I'm not having this massive file that has router.route /location.get guard method .post guard method, router.route /user .get method controller, and so on and so forth. I can just have it once, and it automatically builds out every single route for me auto-magically. So that is the build routes. Let's see here. And if you guys want to see really quick, I have Postman set up, just so you know that I'm not completely crazy and I'm just giving you guys blowing some smoke here. I will show you, actually I've already logged in. I'll show you that later, but you'll see, okay, so I have API v1 quizzes and then the ID. However, you've seen I have not set this up at all, other than the key as quizzes and then that one single router that has the capture of an ID. So if I send, you will see I successfully get an item back, which means that route has been built out in my API. And we can get all of them. So there is no ID here. Same thing. I'm getting all of the items. We'll go to questions. I don't remember if I've already created one or not. Let's see here. Did I create one? No. So I haven't created any yet. So anyways, let me get back to this. Now we will go to the route, or actually, now we'll go into authentication. Oops. And how I built that out. So first, some very simple kind of like explanation as to what JWT authentication is. Sorry, guys. So JWT stands for JSON Web Token. And it's basically an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way for securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. Yes, I just read it off there. And the bare bones of it is it basically allows us, I'm not even touching it at this point, it allows a server to make sure that the client that is making a request is the client that the server expects it to be. And this is actually something I found out doing some research. I did not know this, but you should not store a JSON Web Token in local storage or any easily accessible client data store because, and light bulb went off when I read this, but because if you have an XSS attack, well, guess what? They easily just got your token, and they are going to be able to make requests as you, which is not something you want to do. So it has been said for best practices that you only want to store a JWT token as an HTTP-only cookie that gets automatically sent as you make a request. Oops. And then I have some references or some links that you can go to if you want to look up more about JWT authentication and how it works behind the scenes. So I'm not doing anything special as far as JWT authentication. So I'm not doing like private and primary keys. It's just using a secret. But I will go ahead and show you how I did that. So we'll start with the user model. So when the user is created, they create a username and a password. And this is something within Mongoose, sorry. But if you had your own models or whatever, you could easily build this in. It's basically just a hook that hooks into a certain event and allows you to do something right before that event occurs. So I am hooking into the save event, and I'm saying if the password was modified, if the password was not modified, just pass it along to the next hook or whatever there is. However, if it was, let's hash it with bcrypt and then store it. So that's kind of the initial thing is we're hashing the password with bcrypt so that we can store a hashed password, a salted and hashed password, because you obviously don't want to store plain text. So that's the start of it. Then we'll go back to the auth controller. So then if somebody's going to log in, they will hit this auth controller, and specifically they'll hit this login method. So first it checks to see if there is both an email and a password. If not, just has a simple 400. However, if there is, it tries to find the user. So it simply just uses the ORM to try and find the user. Again, simple, just validation. If not, return a 404. However, if you find the user, return the user. Then pass that on in to the authenticate method. So I'm passing the user that we found into this authenticate method. And authenticate basically, so Mongoose also allows you to tack on methods. So methods outside of the simple CRUD operations, any methods that you want to possibly use on your model. And that's what I do here. I tacked on a check password method. Sorry. Right here. That simply just uses bcrypt again, oops, to compare the password. So it pulls in the password, uses bcrypt compare to check if the password that was passed in is the same as the password that's stored on the model. If it is, it just returns true. If not, it actually returns false. I have not been able to have it actually throw an error yet, but I just did a try catch just in case. So go back. So if the password is the same, we then, let's see here. Yes, if the password is the same, then we create a new token and we pass that back to the user. Go ahead and. Okay. Oh, yeah. There's another reason why I like TypeScript. Utils. Token. There we go. So I'm just using Auth0's Node JWT or JSON Web Token library to simply create a JWT token with the secrets. So I can show you real quick how I did the config. I just have a my index or the config that is passed out is a one of dev prod or test. So I'm able to have multiple config files, but I export just one, and anywhere else in my code, all I do is pull in, darn it, sorry guys, pull in config, and config itself is what determines what config is actually going to be used throughout the application. And you'll notice right here, so environment configs, dev, prod, or test, and then I just export the default environment config depending on what the node environment is. If there isn't a node environment, then I just use dev. And very simply, I have a base config, and I just modify the base config and any of these others. Excuse me. So base config is if is dev, environment is dev, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then this is where I store my, my actual secrets on an environment variable and use .env. If you're not familiar with what that library is, it basically just allows you to create environment variables for your application. And that allows me to not actually put any sensitive keys or secrets or whatever up to GitHub. It's get ignored, and I don't have to pass anything up or any of that up to GitHub. So we'll go back. Again, I just grab the secret that's stored for whatever config I'm working on, whether it's prod, dev, or testing environment. Create that token and pass that token back. And then that gets sent back to the as the response. And I can show you that. So I have just created a simple test.test.com password 1. This is if the actual password is password. However, if I do password 1, you'll see user is unauthorized. So we got a fail because the password was not the same. And then if I put in the correct password, you will see I have a successful token down there at the bottom. So we'll go back. Now coming back in, if I'm making a request that has authentication, that is where, let's see here, my route guard comes into play. So this is the route guard that you saw that I put on, sorry guys, that I put onto all of the routes that I built in the router. And again, as I said, it's just a simple middleware that takes in a request, a response, and a next, and checks if the authorization header is there. If not, just simple 401. If it is, I take whatever is outside of the bearer space and save that as the token. If there is none, again, simple 401. And then I actually go to verify the, good old non-IntelliSense, because back to token. And you'll see right here, again, very simple. I just use the jwt.verify. I take in the token. I pass in the secret that I'm using, allow JWT to verify if that token is correct. If it is, it passes a response of true. If it's not, for whatever reason, it will error out, and then I catch and throw the error. If there is an error, however, because this isn't a try catch, I will log out the error, but I will simply give an unauthorized, because you don't want to show an error to the user. It's, well, I guess you could, but it's not as user friendly, or the user experience isn't as good. And then, again, this is just using Mongoose to find the user by the ID, because the payload is going to have some information about the user. In fact, it's going to have the entire user model encrypted into the payload of the token. And when the token is decrypted, it's passed, the payload is passed, which then has the user model. And I just use the ID, the user ID, and I only want to check, or I don't want to pass back the password. And this is just simple Mongoose stuff that we don't have to worry about. And I get the user, well, possibly get the user. If I don't get the user, again, unauthorized. And then I tack on the user to the request. And then I call the rest of the middlewares. And that's what allows the user to then be authenticated through JWT authentication.
Is that minus password like Mongoose for, don't include that key?
Yeah, it's an exclude. Basically, get the user minus the password. And I forget exactly what lane true does, but when I did it, it was something. I think it just makes it, oh, that's what it passes it as a simple object instead of the Mongoose model. Okay. That being said, I think that's basically it. Let me see. Okay, and then, so, not that this really matters, but because I don't want to have, obviously, any guarding, I created a separate route for the actual auth router, which is just a simple login route. And then the auth router, again, as I said, has that / and then I'm able to actually use the auth controller for the user and just pass in the login method. So that whenever anyone goes to the login route, they just automatically get sent to the login method on the auth controller. That's pretty much the gist of it, I believe.
Do you have a log out route?
No, I haven't created that yet. No. But, I mean, basically what would happen on that is you would just do the same thing, have a /logout, and then you would invalidate the token.
Would that live on like auth-router.js, building out that logout route?
I would believe so, yeah. That's probably where I'd start, and then if I wanted to modify it for whatever reason, I would modify it then. Yeah. So yeah, then these are just the rest of the models I created, but again, they're just basically simple models. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I'll go back to here. Last slide is, do any of you have any questions? Do you want me to go in more depth or to show any of the code again so you can look at it again? Okay, so I will go to this one. So right here you have, this is the locations route, if you will, because the key is going to be the route. And then I'm passing this optional key value pair called extra routes. And it basically allows me, and then this is going to again be the key of whatever that subsequent route is. So this would basically build out locations/search.
Where are you passing that?
Yep. Yeah, I was going to get there. Well, first off, so this is where that router is actually built. So I have a location-search file that allows me to just build the route from that point forward, the router from that point forward. And then I tack it on the extra routes key value pair, and then the build routes util method right here, I tack it on to the original route. So you'll see I have this extra routes, which again is a object, key value pair. I run through them again, pull out that route, which in this case is going to be search, pull out that router, which is this router here, and then I just tack it on after that route. So I tack on that router after the original route, which would be /location, or locations, sorry. Or I'm incorrect. This is /locations. This is going to be the subsequent route. So this would be /search, sorry.
All right, so if you wanted to add a new route now, how would you add a new route? So let's say you want to write a route that hits this user's birthday.
Okay. We could, for right now, I'd probably just create a new file called, we'll just say birthday at this point.
So you create an entirely new file?
You don't have to.
For a route to get a birthday?
You don't have to. You could put all of that on your index file. It's just creating a router.
So your index file is where you're putting in your route information.
Yes.
And building your route.
Correct, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, I like everything separated, organization. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. This is index.js, and this is where.
So that's your object right there. That you're
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, and you can see right here, setup routes.
A user's route, a login route.
Yep. And then the setup routes, like I said, on the server file, this is where I actually build out my Express app, and I pass the server, or the server, into setup routes, which I expose outside of the routes directory. So this is actually what I'm exposing, is the setup routes. So I'm able to encapsulate all of the routes logic within inside the routes directory and not have to have it out anywhere else. And I just pass in the server and then build all of the routes right here. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. I think that's good.